The evolution of the referee of sports and war games into the games master is an interesting one. But I'm satisfied that the modern concept of the game master in tabletop role-playing games is a different beast entirely, and has its own unique set of skills and is its own unique discipline, and can be explored in and of itself regardless of its ties to previous iterations. These days it does feel like every game that comes along has to come up with a different name for the games master, and I think this is probably because no name as yet given to it really captures what it is that the GM does. So what is the core activity of the games master in the modern RPG? Oh, it's storytelling? They're a storyteller? Well, I guess our work here is done. All right, my video on storytelling and role-playing's incompatibility generated quite a few comments and a lot of discussion and good dialogue and so on. And it's changed my views on some of the things that I spoke about. But for me to talk about what a GM does, I'm still going to have to divorce it from storytelling. So in the first part of this video, I am going to defend my position about storytelling and role-playing. So if you're already on board with the idea that GMing and storytelling are separate disciplines, then you can do yourself a favor, and this next chapter of the video, you can just skip it, really. Because I think it's going to end up making this video quite long. And, well, just don't say I didn't warn you. But if you're here for the debate, the team storyteller, team roleplay debate, then, well, here we go again. Hi, my name's Matt. Welcome to the Tomb of Lime. So, storytelling is a word that is used in more than one way. One of the ways is just as a strict verb, and that is the transmission of a story. A story I take to mean a meaningfully linked set of events. They have to be meaningfully linked because otherwise just a strict chronological event would always be a story, or a set of random events could also be a story, but those aren't necessarily stories. And the other way that storytelling, the word, is used is to as an umbrella term for the art form of storytelling. Many people pointed out that there are all manner of activities that come under the storytelling art form, like world building and character creation and setting and description and lore and history and all that. And as part of the storytelling art form, these are forms of storytelling. This guy said it, this guy said it. So to formalize their claim, it is that the subordinate activities under the art form of storytelling are a form of storytelling. They are storytelling. But I think this causes some problems. So to tell a story, you need events to meaningfully link. And part of that can be generating the events that you select from, discarding some and keeping others. And people rightly pointed out that role-playing was a way of generating these events that you can use in storytelling. So generating events, selecting and discarding events and linking them meaningfully and then transmitting them is all part of the storytelling process. But consider the term painting. Painting is like storytelling. It also has a strict verb sense in which you are just applying paint to something, but it also can be the art form of painting, which has a whole bunch of subordinate activities under it. These might include selecting paint colors. They might include looking at paintings. They might include art classes, talking to other painters, buying and selecting paint brushes and paint colors, and looking at nature for color inspiration, and maybe sketching out an artwork before you paint it on the canvas and so on. These are all things that are part of the art form of painting. But if you were to see a painter or anybody at the art supply store buying brushes and you were to ask them what they were doing, they wouldn't say, "I'm painting." Despite getting brushes being a really integral part of what they do as a painter, they don't talk the way that storytellers do when they talk about storytelling. There's a recognition, apparently with every single art form apart from storytelling, that subordinate activities under the art form are not the art form itself. Selecting and buying a paintbrush can be part of the painting art form. But I could also take that brush home and use it to brush melted butter on a pie crust, and that brush would never see a drop of paint in its life. So too can I world build and create setting and lore and characters and so on without them ever being included in a story. These techniques can be used in storytelling. And so when you do it like that, you might call them storytelling techniques, but the techniques themselves are not intrinsic to storytelling, even if you use them that way, because they can be used for things that are completely separate from storytelling. In fact, many of these techniques are art forms in their own right and can be done for their own sake. Composing music might be part of making a film. It might be part of filmmaking, but guess what? Making music is its own art form. If the meanings of words are linked to their usage, then I can't tell you that storytelling the word means a certain thing. But I'm going to use it in the way that I think makes sense. For it to make sense, though, something like the subordinates activities that storytelling involves are not just storytelling. But Matt, I hear you say, when I'm assembling the ingredients of a pie and somebody asks me what I'm doing, I might say I'm baking a pie, even though I haven't actually got to the baking stage yet. And so you are, because you are assembling that pie with the intent of baking it. That doesn't make assembling a pie intrinsically baking, though. I could be assembling a pie to take a photo of it for a cookbook or a magazine. I could be assembling a pie to use as a prop in a film, or to throw into a clown's face. So assembling pie might be one of the activities under the art form of baking, but it's not intrinsic to baking. I can use it for other purposes depending on my intent. So too with any of the techniques that are technically under the storytelling art form. Okay, but Matt, you said that storytelling and role-playing are incompatible, but now you're saying that role-playing can be part of the event generation process, which is, or can be used as part of the storytelling process. Doesn't that make them compatible? Yeah. So role-playing can be part of the storytelling process. Thanks for all the people that did point that out. If storytelling is your superordinate goal, then you can use role-playing in service of it. And in fact, even within role-playing, you can do a bit of storytelling, like a character who you are role-playing could tell a story as part of you role-playing that character. But there is an incompatibility between storytelling and role-playing the same set of events, because these are temporally dependent. Event generation, of which storytelling is a type, is a prerequisite of the event selection process. And the event selection process, meaningfully linking them, is a prerequisite of the transmission process, i.e. the storytelling. Now, if the events have already been selected, then it is too late to generate them. Imagine your friend is not a games master, but a pie master. And they invite you around for a PEG, a pie eating game. And the purpose of the pie eating game is to construct, bake, and then feed a pie to the pie eater, the pie master. Now, when you turn up to their house, they've already constructed, baked, and eaten the pie. But they sit you down anyway and they say, let's begin. And you look at your sheet and it says, all right, the first player says, all right, time to gather the ingredients. And the pie master looks down at his stomach and says, well, the ingredients, they are gathered. And then we move on to the second player and he says, well, okay, we've got to bake the pie. And the pie master looks down and says, the pie is baked. And then the third player says, well, we feed the pie to the pie master. And then the pie master says, well, the pie has been eaten. And all the players nod and look at each other and go, yes, we have been part of the pie eating game. This is the relationship that a GM that puts the storytelling temporally before the role-playing has with their players. This is how storytelling and role-playing can be incompatible. So to sum up this very silly section, I would say the subordinate activities of an art form are not necessarily intrinsic to that art form itself, which means by performing any of the activities, you are not necessarily engaging in the art form depending on what your intent is. Some of them can be done for their own sake or in service of a different art form. Additionally, you cannot engage in a prerequisite step of a process if the latest step has already been completed. So by those two tokens, I would say that role-playing and GMing is not a form of storytelling, although it can be used that way. Also that storytelling, a set of events, prevents those events from being role-played. Okay, welcome back. So why have I gone to all these lengths to try and separate storytelling from role-playing and GMing? Well, I think that the difference in intent between a storyteller and a role-play results in different interactions with the fictional worlds in which they inhabit. Consider a person that takes a trip to some destination just with the intent of experiencing that place, with a person who goes there and takes a heap of footage, takes a bunch of photos, takes a little flying drone camera and takes selfies and so on, with the intent of cutting that into reels and content and writing a blog about their trip. Because of their different goals, they interact with the world in different ways. Storytellers are the travel bloggers of fantasy realms. Role players, on the other hand, they just want to live there. They just want to experience what it's like to be there. They just want to live in the moment. And they could care less about event generation, event selection, and transmission of these things. The techniques common to storytelling in RPGs, like world building and creating characters and setting and lore and history and all that, are not storytelling techniques by virtue of the fact that they can be used for storytelling, because we use them for something else. We want that stuff just so we can create a world that we can experience living in. This means too that being a GM can stand on its own as its own discipline, and that knowing the techniques that are common to both might give you a leg up in doing the other one. But it doesn't necessarily mean that being a good GM will make you a good storyteller, or vice versa. Reading books on storytelling like Saves the Cat or whatever won't necessarily make you a better GM. Neither will being a good script writer or a good novelist or a comic book writer or whatever. Brush technique might be common to both painting and baking, but baking is not a subcategory of painting, and GMing is not a subcategory of storytelling. It's its own art form with skills that are uncommon to all forms of storytelling, in addition to the ones that it has in common with storytelling. This is a good thing. Storytelling, I think, artificially limits role-playing by making it a subordinate technique of another art form rather than an art form in and of itself. Without these limitations, role-playing can be a lot more like how we act in life. We don't do stuff in life just as an event generation process for some future narrative. Well, I mean, some people might act that way, but some of us just want to live in the moment, and RPGs can offer us an experience like that, and this has nothing to do with story. And I wonder why it is that so many GMs have kind of storytelling or storyteller as part of their identity as a games master. Is it because they sort of want to belong to the long lineage of storytellers? They want to trace directly from Homer and Herman Melville to themselves? You know, if they had chosen any other medium than role-playing games, that they would be world-renowned for their storytelling genius. That their campaign, which is the Moby Dick of Dungeons & Dragons, their magnum opus, would be respected by all, but just because we've chosen RPGs as our medium, it's only experienced by 5 people instead of millions, and even those 5 people don't appreciate it, right? All right, look, I'm joking. I don't think that's how people feel. All right. Onwards. We can actually get on to the actual part of the video I wanted to do here. All right, so if the GM's role is not a storyteller, despite sharing some of the techniques with that art form, then what is it? Wouldn't it be wonderful if the GM's role in a role-playing game, the core activity... Now, I hope you've got your Tomb of Lime bingo cards here ready. What if that role was to role-play? It would be so parsimonious and elegant if actually the GM and the players had exactly the same role, and they did exactly the same thing. It's just that their domains differed. The players get the domain of the player characters, and the GM gets the domain of the non-player characters. All right, here's a comment I got on that video, and it's nothing personal, dude. It's just you were the most recent one at the time I'm doing this, who comes from a long line of people saying the exact same thing. But this will help illustrate my point here. They say, the second you make it so that an antagonist takes action in the world, you've just added plot. There's no bonus points for doing that on the fly rather than preparing in advance. Yep, no, I don't think so. I disagree. I mean, I wouldn't use that language though. Okay, plot definition, here we go. The main events of a play, novel, film, or similar work devised and presented by the writer as an interrelated sequence. So yeah, that's very similar to how we envisioned storytelling or story in the previous part of the video. But an antagonist taking action, I don't think has to be that. Consider the statement, tomorrow I will decide whether to go to the pool or to the park. Perfectly coherent things to say. But compare it with this. Tomorrow I will decide to go to the pool. The decision in this second sentence is kind of redundant because decisions appear to always be sort of made in the moment, on the fly. Like you can decide to decide something later, and you can decide now to do something later, but you cannot decide to make a decision a certain way later, because if you're doing that, you're just making that decision now. If you decide before a session starts that an antagonist will do a certain thing, then the players have no way to alter that event, and their agency has been taken away. But if instead the GM is role-playing that antagonist, then they can make those decisions in character, on the fly, as it were, in the moment, just like any other role-playing situation, which does allow it to be altered depending on player choice. In my game, then, I think you do get bonus points for doing it on the fly, because that's just what role-playing is, and that preserves player agency. I mean, this is how the players act in a session. They don't get to decide beforehand what their player characters will definitely do in the middle of a session. So I don't know why the GM would get special privilege in this regard. The players can't fudge their roles, then neither can the GM. If the players can't role-play the NPCs, then the GM can't role-play the PCs. If you do plan for an antagonist to do something in the session, and then the players do something that ends up preventing it, and then you have to adapt, I mean, good. I mean, I think that means that what you didn't do really was make a decision for that character beforehand, but that you provided a motivation, that there's something that they wanted to do, but in the event that they couldn't, then that motivation will guide them to do something else, something that perhaps you could never have predicted. And yeah, I think that's good. I think that's bonus points. But what about stuff that isn't role-playing a character with motivations? What about forces of nature and other godlike control over your imaginary world? How does that fit in? Well, if roleplay is our superordinate goal, then we've got all these subordinate activities that we can do in support of roleplay. And one of the things that I think facilitates roleplay really well is world verisimilitude. If your world feels real and the consequences of your decisions don't feel arbitrary, if the world is full of detail and life, then I think this helps with roleplay. All of that other stuff, all the world building, all the creating NPCs, all the lore, all the history, all the setting, all the description, even the mechanics of the game, all of that isn't necessarily storytelling, because none of it may end up in a story. If a story eventuates, fine, but that isn't the goal that we're setting out to do. These aren't storytelling techniques in our case, they're world verisimilitude techniques with the goal of facilitating roleplay. The difference is that as a GM, whenever I some event happen, like weather or a wild animal being in a certain place, or even some cataclysmic event like an earthquake or something, I'm not doing it because it's meant to be part of a plot and part of a storytelling process or event generation or whatever. It's just part of world verisimilitude. You know, if we have the ground shaking before the big earthquake, you might call it foreshadowing, but to me, it is just part of world verisimilitude. So I think it's the GM's role to role play the NPCs and then add world verisimilitude within that domain. And I think it's the player's role to roleplay the player characters and add world verisimilitude in that domain. So feeling out exactly where the GM's domain finishes and the player's domain starts is probably something for your social contracts. But it just feels so right that the GM and the players ultimately are just doing the same thing in different domains. It means that the title of this video is ironic. That was probably on your bingo cards too, right? It means that the GM and the players are equal and united in their role, and they collaboratively add to the world to help each other roleplay. Like in my last video, I mentioned that when a novelist describes a scene, they add to it and it builds up that picture in your mind. Well, in an RPG, I think all the players contribute to this. And if they've got the goal of adding to world verisimilitude, as opposed to putting something into the world that will help them win the game, then you can really create a living, breathing, imaginary space. The GM describes a scene. They say there's an apartment, and to the left there's a faded kitchenette or whatever. And the player says, "All right, I go into the kitchen and I grab the kettle and I put the water in the kettle and make some tea or whatever." I never mentioned that there was a kettle in there, but I'm totally happy for them to do it because it feels like it's them adding to world verisimilitude within the domain of their character. So in summary, I think that the GM and the players are ultimately doing the same thing. They're just doing it over different domains, like at different resolutions. I think that none of this need have anything to do with the story or storytelling at all, necessarily, because that's not our goal. It's not what we're doing. We're there to live and experience an imaginary world. And we do that by role-playing our character. And one of the ways that we facilitate that is by adding to world verisimilitude. I think if everyone is on board with this as a goal, not to tell a story, but to inhabit characters in a shared imaginary world, to role-play and to add world verisimilitude in service of that goal, it'll transform your RPGs into something unique to the medium, like an eminently immersive and rewarding experience like no other. Look, a lot of this is kind of semantic and silly, and the way that we use words, it doesn't really matter because, we've got the activities that we know that we want to do, and we're doing them. And ultimately, the way that people talk about these things and the way that they use language, it doesn't really affect, a rose by any other name, right? But I like the idea that storytelling and GMing are not intrinsically linked, because I like the idea that we can examine them separately. Maybe that separation will help us to tease out things that we had not realized before about them. I think storytelling and what I do as a GM and what I do as a player in a role-playing game are fundamentally different. But there is still room for some storytelling in the role-playing space and vice versa. We just need to be careful about that relationship. Anyway, my name's Matt. This was The Tomb of Lion. Thank you for listening.